Right, we are back. Room 301 podcast. I'm joined today by B, who is head of performance marketing at Breaks. Golf Breaks. Welcome, B. How are
Hi,
you?
really good. Thanks, Rob. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to be on the podcast.
No, no problem at all. Would you like to give yourself a quick introduction? I know you've been in the game a long, long time. So yeah, worth going over your history and how you got to sort of where you are now.
Yeah, so I'm so work at Golf Breaks. I have been in the business for a long time, 10 years. So I originally started as a placement student, returned as a grad, always worked in marketing and in more of the digital space. So I've seen a lot of change over the years. I've seen us go from, being predominantly based in the UK to then go branching out internationally to Scandi and US, and then all of the challenges that come with that. So always worked in sort of more of the content SEO background, and then as the years have gone on, I've taken on more channels under my wing, and then taking on more of that performance role. And that, to a bit more context around that, is looking at how all of the channels feed into our website, and
Yeah.
looking at how we can get them to convert better. So working with alongside our digital analysts and then our head of digital as well, to looking at the best in class platforms and how we can utilize them as a marketing team. And so, as you can imagine, there's lots of different tasks and responsibilities that we have that we need to
Yeah.
manage accordingly.
Fab. Well, my first question was going to be performance marketing. How would you describe that, which you've done? So cool. So today we are going to talk about something that's, I suppose, it's fairly new to me from a marketing point of view. My background is actually in software development, so the idea of sprints is quite normal for me in a previous life, but not in a marketing sense. So we are going to talk about marketing sprints today. And I know it's something that you've implemented very successfully in your role. So my first question is, with the sprint process having gained quite a lot of popularity in sort of various industries, what for you, given you sort of manage a team, which needs a lot of management and collaboration, what for you makes it an effective approach to manage your team and your workloads?
Well, I think, as I touched upon before, we have lots of different stakeholders across the business who have lots of different requests. So my team, we look at the content on the website, we look after the SEO, so that is optimizing the site on site, as in content wise, but also technically, so working with the developers, looking after the email team as well, so making sure,
Yeah.
looking at the emails that we send out, and then also looking at all of those channels coming in, also PPC as well, and paid social. So ultimately, there are so many different areas that we need to cover, and with that means that we, like, organization and prioritization is critical. And we got to a point where I felt like I was saying, no, we can't do that because we're too busy, and I was too busy to look at why we were too busy. So it was really difficult for stakeholders around the business to understand why we were so busy, when I was like, I don't have time to actually spell out to you why we're so busy. So introducing this process basically made that so much easier for me, because I would be planning things anyway, but it just put more of a process behind it and a prioritization to
Yeah.
manage that workload, essentially.
So do you lead the sprint meetings, or is it someone else on your
So
team?
how it works is, there's three roles essentially in a sprint. You have the scrum master, you have the product owner, and you have the team members. In an IT context, that would be the developers, but in, like, the marketing context, that's
Yeah.
basically the team. So whether they're working in SEO, content, email. My role is more of the product owner role, and what that means is that I take all of our tasks, the requests from around the business, and I prioritize those in a backlog. So I look at, what are we trying
Okay.
to achieve as a marketing team? What is the business trying to achieve? And prioritize that backlog accordingly, and then build that into sprints. We then also have the scrum master, who is basically in charge of implementing best practice and making sure that we're all in line, all following the process correctly, but still providing a bit of flexibility, because you need to be able to adapt the process as well. And I think that was one of The concerns about Scrum, introducing Scrum and sprints to the marketing team, which, we like to be creative and we like to be seen as, being free spirits. And then we're adopting this very process driven, more IT function. So there does also need to be a little bit of adaptation there, but still following some of those best practices which need to be followed to make it a success.
Sure. Yeah. And do you typically find that you still have resource issues with sprints, or do you find that because you prioritize and because you're very clear on the sort of resource you have, that is sort of eradicated by the sprint process?
I think in any business, there will always, you could say, if I had more people, I could deliver this. So there's always going to be resource challenges in terms of how much the team can deliver.
Yeah.
What it really helps with is showing based on the amount of hours that we have. So we work in 2-week sprints. So based on these 2 weeks, I
Okay.
can see how many hours our team have available. So that takes into account any meetings that they have, so we'll take that out of their available hours. No one's going to work at 100%. You just can't, else people won't be allowed to have a toilet break or go and have a coffee or just have a bit of a walk, away from their desk. So take into their velocity into account, and then like anything else that might impact it, and then we have their available hours, and we can then plan the workload accordingly based on what they have, plan those individual tasks. We estimate how long they'll take. And then what that means is that we can manage expectations from around the business. So if someone says to me, right, you need to get this task done, which is going to be 50 hours. And then I can look at the team and say, well, if we're going to do that, then this has got to give. Is the business prepared for that? So it helps us understand what resource we have, but then also have those conversations. It's really easy for me to say, look, if you give me an extra person, I can give you this amount and we could achieve this, but without that we can't do that. So it does identify resource challenges, but helps you manage them and manage our workload accordingly. Whereas before we were kind of running around a little bit like headless chickens trying to manage everything. So yeah, from a resource perspective, it gives more transparency ultimately.
No, I personally love the sound of this, and it's definitely something that I shall be stealing from you and implementing in our own business, I believe. But no, anybody leading a marketing function or marketing directors, marketing managers, whatever you want to call it, a big part of that role is managing stakeholder expectations. And I think this is such a clever way of doing that in terms of that prioritization, explaining that if you want this doing, actually, this might have to give and what's the overall impact on the business, all that kind of stuff. And also when you're making hiring decisions as well, if you've got a clear, structured list of, things that need doing and what order they need to be done in, does it make an impact on the business if we add another head into this team to get more done in one time? And it's all really, really clever. And it honestly seems like a no-brainer. And I'm surprised that you're one of the only persons that I've actually spoke to about this and that has actually implemented this. And it's clearly, it's clearly doing what you want it to do. So just diving into sprints a bit more then. So how would you typically define the goal and objectives of each sprint, and what sort of factors do you consider, and does it feed into a wider marketing plan? Do you plan any more than that 2 weeks you mentioned ahead at all, or is it simply 2 week sprints?
So with us, as part of the sprint process, what we do is I will always set the sprint goals. I will set the sprint goals for the team based on what we need to achieve. So if we have a big project going on, so at the moment we're in a stage where we have onboarded lots of new platforms, 3 new platforms, and with that requires migration of content. So one of the most recent examples being a dam, and what that means is we have to migrate all of our assets from one place to the new dam. That is quite monotonous work, but I know that as a business we have to get that done. That is a business objective. So what I then do is I will plan accordingly in each sprint how many hours that we, based on all of the other items that we have to do as a marketing team, we have to action, how many hours can we realistically do based on that. So for example, my most recent sprint goal is doing at least as a team 15 hours of migration over to our new dam. So I look at basically
Okay, yeah.
what the business needs, so those wider biggest business projects, but then I also look at the marketing goals. So for example, if we've got a campaign that I know that is launching, I need to make sure that we've planned in all of that work accordingly to make sure that that campaign hits that deadline. And that will be one of the sprint goals. And the sprint goals are the things that, you know, we really need to strive to achieve as a team during that 2 weeks. But I will also always be thinking about the sprints ahead as well. So for example, if it is a big project like the dam project that we have, if we've got an overarching deadline of that needs to be live in 3 months, I'll have to plan to make sure that we hit that deadline. So it's taken into account business objectives, then marketing objectives as well, when looking at those items, and also just business as usual. Like those things, you know, you can't let slip the business as
Yeah.
usual tasks. So it's also taken into account those.
No, of course. I think one of the challenges if you're leading any function, as you are, is how to balance the time between short-term and long-term goals, isn't it? And I think if you're playing that role of the product owner, you've got a nice sort of bird's eye view of what we can do in the short term, but also what we need to do in the long term. And again, I think sprints are a really good way of combating that sort of challenge as well. So you can tell I'm a fan, can't you? So I'm sure, you know, communication throughout plays a massive role. And again, if it's okay with you, it'd be great if you could go into detail in terms of the meeting structures you have and how often you touch base as a team during those sprints. But first of all, any tools that you have in mind that help with communication, and what does that meeting structure look like? How often do you touch base as a team, and you know, report on progress and sort out the next sprint,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth?
So the tool that we use to manage the sprint, so everyone can see exactly what they're working on every single day that they come in over the 2 weeks. We use Asana. So that is you know, a standard project management tool, but it works really well for us as a marketing team, and that is where we can also tag up particular tickets, so I can see, you know, how much time we're spending in a particular area, whether that be content optimization, you know, whether that be the dam project or whatever. So I can tag all of that up. And so what we do in terms of comms is we have a daily stand up, and that is first thing in the morning, 15 minutes. It never goes over 15 minutes because we want to keep people engaged. And that is an opportunity for people to then say, this is what I worked on yesterday. This is what I've got coming up. I've got this blocker. I can't move this ticket forward unless that gets blocked. Can anyone help me with that? But also to say, I'm really going to struggle to get this ticket over the line. Does anyone else have any capacity that they can help me with this ticket? So as collectively as a team, we can hit this goal.
Yeah.
So it's a really nice way of just touching base without it being meeting upon meeting, knowing that it will only be that 15 minutes. Like everyone knows exactly what they're getting out of that meeting.
And how many people are on that? That's very impressive to keep it to 15
Yeah,
minutes.
I know. And it can be a challenge, but you learn to adapt. So in terms of our team, we've probably got about 8. Our IT team, and that is just within sort of my area. There are wider people within the marketing team who don't follow the sprint process, which is also a challenge within itself. But we'll maybe cover that a bit later. But so the IT team, they're bigger. They have lots more people, but it just always is that 15 minutes, and you just know to keep it to the point, and you know what to cover rather than go. And if it's a case of actually, could I have a call after this to go through that, rather than keep everyone on a call about something that doesn't bother other people or isn't part of their remit, because that's quite easy to do also, if like all of a sudden you're sitting on a call talking about something that's nothing to do with your role. By having that standard, it just really helps everyone knows kind of what they need to get out of it.
And presumably that's all done remotely for the most part.
For the most part, yeah. So our Scrum Master, he is remote. He's full-time remote anyway, so we do tend to all go on that. But just with hybrid working, it just makes sense, and it's so much easier with Teams to be able to do that. So that's another form of comms that we use. Obviously, Teams, it's really easy. But Asana, you can actually talk to people via the tickets, mention people in those. So that really helps from that perspective.
Perfect. And then you mentioned there if some people are struggling with a particular ticket or task or anything like that. So I know one of the things that is unavoidable is changes, disruptions, delays, and so on. How do you typically handle them? Is it as simple as shifting it forward to the next sprint, or is there anything you've got in mind for that?
Yeah, so it is a challenge, but it was way more challenging before we had sprints. There are things that are going to come
I
up
can
last
imagine.
minute, and you need to be able to adapt. So if something comes in that is super urgent, it's really easy for me to have a conversation with people and say, look, if this needs to come in, then this is going to be the knock-on impact on these other tickets that we had planned. Are you happy with that? Or I'd go to my boss, are you happy with that? Or I'd go to the business, look, this project is actually going to be delayed because we've had this request. Are we all happy with that? And then everyone knows exactly where we're at, rather than me trying to, shoehorn something in and then risk of the team getting burnout, and that's one of the big things of sprints, is just managing that resource to get as much as you can out of a team, but in a comfortable, so that they're comfortable, so they don't feel that they have to be working until midnight on a particular project. Don't get me wrong, there's sometimes that you do all need to chip in, but because it's not happening all the time, you get more of a buy-in, because people feel respected, and it keeps motivation up. Just people knowing that these are the hours that I've got, and there's more willingness to chip in, rather than if they feel like this is happening all the time, like I'm so like burnt out and everything. So it's really good from that perspective.
Yeah, and it's super structured as well, isn't it? So where the team's concerned, they don't have to worry too much about what to do and when, and the sort of project management side of it. And as you say, the vast majority of these people are creative people.
Mm.
And certainly, in my experience, they're less concerned about timeframes and would rather do the things that they excel at and what they're good at. Has that been an issue at all? Has that sort of rigidness in terms of the structure been an issue? Had you pushed back on that?
Yeah,
Or?
well, I think from maybe a more of a wider, like stakeholder perspective, if you say to them, we can't do that, like, or look, we don't have capacity, then they're like, well, sometimes, you need to have flexibility. And it's still quite easy for me to have the conversation and say, that's fine, but the business has said to me, no, we need to focus on that. So it makes those conversations easier. It's probably more challenging for people who don't work in sprints to understand it, because it does seem, and it is adopting an IT process. So it's that education piece around it to say, but this is working really well for the team, and look at all of this output. And so from that perspective, it makes those conversations more comfortable in a weird way, because before, if I just said, we're too busy to do that, then it would be like, well, why are you too busy? And it's quite difficult to
Why?
explain
Yeah.
why you're so busy. But this, you can literally show them, like, this is everything the team's working on. So, deal with it almost.
Is that all set up is that all set up in quite a visual way
Yeah,
then?
so in Asana it's great, and we also do like end of each 2 week sprint. Our Scrum Master, so he's an IT project manager, but we've adopted him in marketing. So I hope we don't ever take him back. They have threatened to do
Yeah.
it, but I'm like, please don't. So he will send a stats pack at the end, and then it really clearly shows
Okay.
how long we've spent, what the team have, the hours they've put in, have we hit the sprint goals, where has our time been spent, and we see that over, and then it just also shows it over the year as well, so we can kind of see. And we're managing the content for both UK and the US website, so we can look at our split of time based on, UK is our cash cow, but also US is our area of huge growth. That is more in a startup phase, although it's sort of more kind of 5, 6, 7 years old now, but how they approach things is quite different. So I need to make sure that as a team we're spending the right amount of time in each business unit, from that perspective. So there's lots of things there that I look at and analyze after each sprint to make sure that we are focusing on the right area, because sometimes if you're in the moment as well, you don't realize how much actually I'm maybe we're spending too much time in this area and we shouldn't.
No, absolutely,
We
yeah.
should look at how we can make that more efficient.
Yeah, no, I have to say, it seems like you're very aligned with the company's sort of strategic objectives, and I think any marketing department, in-house or even agency, whatever it might be, having that awareness of what the strategic direction of the business is and what their priorities are is massively important. How do you sort of keep yourself up to speed with that? Do you sit on a leadership team or anything like that, or is it sort of available company wide? How do you make sure that you are working towards the company goals effectively?
Yeah, so we've got different meetings. So for example, we have like a monthly digital strategy meeting, and that is where we sit down with the leadership and our directors, and we share updates on whether that be on experimentation progress. That's one of the newer platforms we've brought on board, and we look at that. But then also we have like monthly what we call our product meetings, which is where we just look at results, sales results, and everything. And I'm in a lot of those meetings, so it's my responsibility as product owner to communicate that with the rest of the team who won't be in as many of those meetings. And I do that through the sprint goals, and that's really important actually for team buy-in and motivation, for them to know actually the stuff that they're doing is contributing to these goals and the business. And I always look to try and give exposure to the team as well. So, especially if they're doing something quite monotonous, like, having to spend 15 hours moving assets or whatever, like that can be a bit demotivating. So it's
Sure.
the fact that
Yeah.
it's a goal, we check in on the goal, how's everyone feeling, just keeping people motivated towards that, and say, our directors, they really appreciate what you're doing, and that's my responsibility to communicate that with them to help with the motivation of the team.
No, that makes total sense. That's, yeah, super important. I think anybody in any form of management or leadership position, I think making sure that the wider business or the wider stakeholders have awareness of what's going on is massively key. Keeping things hidden is never the right thing to do, and having this sprint and having it all visual in Asana, it sounds like that allows you to give that awareness to the wider business and what the impacts are in it. Overall, I imagine that just helps you make better marketing, better spend decisions, better hiring decisions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It really helps with those decisions. And I've used and it sounds like when I say I've used the data from the sprints, it makes it sound like it's almost like keeping tabs on people, and that is actually
No, I
a
get it. Yeah.
really important part of the adoption of this, because it is a change to how people work, and you don't want people to feel like this new process has come in place to keep tabs on them and make sure that they're spending the right amount of hours and stuff. There is an element of making sure that we are working on the right things and that you're getting the best out of your people, but ultimately it is there to protect their resource. And that's what I say to them. This is to protect your resource so you're not being pulled in lots of different directions, and to keep you motivated, keep you on track. You come in every day, like every person in the team comes in every day and knows exactly what they can work on. And it's down to them to then, they do have autonomy over their tickets and what they work on to an extent, unless there's a deadline and they know that it needs to be done by tomorrow. Like they can control how they work in those 2 week sprints. So it's not super rigid that they have no flexibility. And that gives them some control over it as well.
Like I say, definitely, I will be taking this and I'll be
I could talk
implementing
about
it.
it all day,
Um,
because I don't know how we did it before. I honestly, I just don't know
um,
how we managed to function. And we were lucky that we did introduce this before COVID, just before COVID, when all of a sudden everything went into lockdown, and we were in the middle of building a brand new website and launching a new website. So for us, that meant that we could carry on throughout COVID. Everyone came in, knew exactly what they were working on, because we had these tasks that were given to them. And everyone still kept that team motivation during a time which was, nobody knew what was going on, and it was all very uncertain.
yeah, no, I
So
can
the
imagine.
fact that we managed to get that in place before, that really helped us throughout that period as well.
I can imagine actually taking ourselves back to COVID, which is probably not the most ideal thing to do, but I imagine the fact that you were all touching base
Yeah.
every single day, so everyone was seeing the whites of each other's eyes, and it probably felt like a lot of businesses I spoke to, and ourselves included, we felt like we lost that collaboration, we lost that sort of team spirit as COVID begun, because we all came from an office environment. We had quite a busy, buzzy office to working from home, and it was like, well, we were trying to shoehorn calls in to make sure that everyone spoke to each other and stuff like that. And a lot of them didn't really have a purpose behind them. We were talking about what we had for tea, and
Yeah,
all sorts of stuff like that. But you was very, very purpose driven. Clearly, everyone had a reason to jump on a 15-minute call in the morning, get that sort of human interaction that everyone needed during COVID. And I imagine that worked really well for you, and it was really quite organic as well. Didn't feel
yeah.
forced or anything like that. So timing wise, it sounds like you picked a
Exactly.
perfect
And it
time
meant
for it, to
that
be
we
honest.
could actually get a resource from other areas of the business. So, for example, our tournaments team, we have a group of amazing people in there, and they were obviously they couldn't go out and run tournaments. Everything was cancelled. So we
No,
brought them into the sprints, and it was really easy to bring new people into the sprints. It took them a little bit of getting used to, but then they came in, they had a purpose, they weren't just on furlough, they could contribute to the new website launch. And from that perspective, it's really easy to move people in and then out again. So it's really adaptable from that perspective, and then getting them on. And we always made sure a rule was that we had our cameras turned on, which is actually less like IT. I have battles with the IT lot when I have calls with them, because
oh
they all
really?
hide behind. They don't like their cameras on. But yeah, we always made sure that we did that, just so that people, were felt they could see each other, rather than just speaking to
Yeah,
a
absolutely. Yeah.
picture.
I think that's really important. I think there's a lot of good, absolutely good reasons why people don't have their cameras on. But for me, the benefits, the feeling of human interaction, also just understanding people's body
Yeah.
language, the head nods that you don't see, it's really super important. So, just taking it back a bit, then, B. So, how did this all come about? Was it your brainchild? Did you approach the business with this? And what advice would you have for anybody else in your position? Because the typical listener of this podcast is somebody managing a team, an in-house marketing function, and they might think about taking this approach to their senior leadership team or board or whatever it might be, and ask for the blessing on this sort of process, shall we say? So, what would your advice be there? And was it your brainchild to begin with?
So I work very closely with the IT and sort of like the more the digital function that sits within the IT. So in charge of the project, or bringing the new product in, and working closely with them to say, these are our requirements. Can you build that? So I knew that it worked for them, and we actually brought our IT project manager on board around a similar time, and I was always in those conversations about sprints, and I because I work closely with them, and we would often have to work together. I would often have conversations with them saying, well, we're too busy, we can't do that, or we won't be able to do that in time for you. And so it was just from conversations with them, and they, some of the guys there said, I think this will be really good for you. And the IT project manager said, this has been known to work really well in marketing. And so read more into it. So I can't take full credit for it, but I will take a bit, because I did.
Just take it.
Yeah,
Just take it.
exactly. But I could see how it would work, and it solved a massive problem,
Yeah.
or a massive issue that we had, which was just managing workloads. And because there was, there were articles out there about how it works really well for marketing, and that was oh God, I forget, with COVID, like that was not 4 or 5 years ago now, that was out there, but not many people were adopting it. And I did also see it was one of the online conferences, I saw someone else talking about Scrum for marketing and the benefits of it. So from that perspective, and I was very lucky that our IT project manager is great, and he's really good at explaining the processes and the efficiencies and how it should be done. And that's one of the key things that I would say. You need to have everyone's buy-in. So explaining why it's important is change management to an extent. Like, so you need to make sure that everyone's on board. You explain it clearly and explain the benefits to the team as to why it's going to benefit them. And make sure you do have to spend a bit of time setting up. So for example, the Asana board, to make sure that you have those processes in place. Once you've done all of that, it becomes your bread and butter. Like it's not there. There are some things that you need to learn, like story pointing and everything. But
Okay, so you do all the, because
yeah,
I know a lot of people that run scrums, and they dropped the story pointing actually in favor of simple time
yeah.
measurements and stuff like that. So do you still do the pointing, and so you really are quite, you've really taken the IT
Yeah,
approach
and so
to
the
owned it, haven't you?
story pointing at first, we were like, I have no idea what's this. I mean, you're kind of like, I think it's this, but it becomes really natural. And the reason why the story pointing work is just another way of measuring the size of the task in terms of like uncertainty,
It's
size of task.
it's complexity,
Yeah,
isn't it?
complexity. It's just
Yeah,
another
so just
way.
for anyone listening, story pointing is, it represents, I mean, B, you're probably better off explaining than me, but size and complexity, is that
Yeah,
fair?
yeah, essentially. And we still do estimate the hours. That's really important because that's an easy way to kind of see the size of a task and understand, look at those available hours. And then what we do is also mark the actual. So if someone's estimated that it's going to be 10 hours, but actually they've managed to do it in 8, that's a learning for the next time that actually we could do more
Absolutely,
in
yeah.
that time. So that element is still really important, and we do still adopt the story pointing. But I do agree, like it's probably something that if you do struggle with, you could drop. It's just something that still works for us.
No, absolutely. So, in terms of, I mean, for you, I imagine it was quite easy because it was already being implemented elsewhere in the business, wasn't it? But if other marketing leaders listening to this podcast, what advice would you have for them taking it to their stakeholders in terms of implementing that? I suppose it's as simple as explaining the benefits,
It
isn't it?
is, but it's also explaining the challenges. From my perspective, as I mentioned earlier, the challenges were that we were being pulled in all directions. We couldn't facilitate all of the work that was being requested, and we were letting people down. And that's the worst. I don't like saying no to
No,
people, and I don't like the thought of the team letting others down. But also, I don't like to see my team demotivated. And that's a really important thing. So I wanted to protect their resource, and so it was quite an easy conversation. And by selling the benefits, these are the challenges, and I think that this process is going to solve those, and it has. So I think it's also being really clear with, say, if you are speaking to more creative people, of yes, this is an IT process, but this is some amazing examples where it's worked for marketing. And there is stuff out there. There's lots of stuff out there now where more people are adopting it. Lots of examples where it works really well. So it's actually taking that, but also adapting it to what works for you. So for example, our sprints for the IT lot are through Jira, and that's probably not quite right for us because that is quite
no.
that is better suited to that way of working. And that's why Asana, which is more visual, it's more colorful, it's a bit more creative, like it kind of manages more of those creative tasks, worked better for us. So it's finding those things that work for your team as well. But yeah, just it hopefully it would be quite an easy conversation to have because it's just
We tell
improving
them to listen to this.
processes. It's improving processes and efficiencies. It's like I could tell you exactly what my team have been working, and it's also really easy to give updates. This is what the team have achieved last month because I can just go back through
Mm.
the boards, because it's often quite difficult to recall off the top of your head. If someone said what the team been working on, it's quite difficult to remember. I can just go back through the sprints, which are all, so we have a board each sprint. So that's where people can see their tasks. So I can just go back to,
Do you keep a log?
yeah,
Do you keep the
yeah, we
histories in place?
archive the
Yeah,
old boards, so
nice.
could always go back and see what we've worked on.
Nice. Cool. Well, I have to say, B, this has been, I think people will find this probably one of the most insightful episodes that we've done because it's so actionable. And I think there'll be a lot of people listening to this who take this idea and adopt it, or at least take some
Mm.
parts of the framework and move forward with it because of the structure, the organization around it. And I think, I speak to marketing leaders day in, day out. It's what I do for a living. We offer clients our performance marketing services, and the same challenges come to me day in day out. Is the reason they need our service is because they're lacking the resource internally, and they're managing all different priorities, and the CEO wants this, and the sales director wants this, and so and so wants this. And I think this makes it such an easy way to, in some cases, turn down requests internally, but also visually show why you're having to do that. It's not because you're being horrible about it or you've got a preference to somebody. It's simply because you've got priorities of the business and you've only got a certain, finite amount of resource. So I think this is a really good approach. And like I say, I think a lot of people run with this. So really grateful for your time. The last question I've got, with that in mind, with a lot of people, I imagine will take this approach and run with it. Are there any sort of specific insights or experiences that you've got to help people in those early phases of running sprints and what challenges they might face in the early stages, and any parting words of wisdom effectively for anybody looking to approach this?
Yeah, I think I might repeat myself, but it's just being committed to it. It's once again getting the buy-in. But I can't emphasize enough how important just getting those processes in place and spending time, because at the end of the day, everyone is going to be spending time planning workloads. So this just adds more of a process to it. So I would always say plan out what the team need to work on, but it was maybe less frequent, or you kind of expect people to know what they should be working on. So it's just making sure that you spend time setting up, getting to understand it. It's not super complex at all, but just that early
No.
phase to make sure that you adopt it correctly, because it is a bit of a change and to how you might currently work. And unless you sort of get those processes in place and get a really good scrum master who understands the process, so whether that be someone internally who learns about it, I don't know, like if you want to just adopt, like get the buy-in first, like if your resources and your budget is limited, someone who can just go through a course or something, or just read about it
Yeah,
first, because
absolutely.
that's so important. Else, unless you've got someone who says that we should be doing it like this and these are the best practice and this is why we're doing it, then you're going to struggle, I think, to get it off the ground.
Yeah, and there's no two ways about it. There is a front-loaded time investment to all of this, but from what I've heard today, I think most people will agree that it's definitely
It will
worth
save so much
that
time, and
investment.
it saves so much of my time. Like just planning those 2 week sprints is so much quicker than thinking about a whole month's worth of work or anything. And that's one thing that we found
I
as well.
imagine.
With 2 weeks works perfectly for us as a team. We tried doing it longer, we tried doing it shorter, and we found that sweet spot. So it is about finding what works for you as well. So be open to that. Like there's, although there are certain things that you should follow for the best adoption, you can also adapt. So find out what works for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think every business is very different. Everyone employs different people. So yeah, I think there's- just because it's a framework doesn't mean it has to be completely
Yeah.
rigid to your business. So no, B, really appreciate it. I don't know if you want to just spend a minute or two just talking about golf breaks and just explaining what that is. I'm sure we've got a few golfers listening.
Yeah, so golf breaks is we sell golf breaks, holidays all across the world. So UK, across Europe, further afield, the likes of Thailand, Mauritius, some lovely destinations. So we're
Lovely.
actually in our 25th year this year. So
Oh wow.
founded in 1998 by Andrew Stanley, who's still very much, the soul of the company. We're celebrating actually this weekend at Celtic Manor, so one of our resorts in Wales. So we've got a bit of a birthday bash. So yeah, the largest golf tour operator, and we have gone from selling, being UK based and branching out to the US and Scandinavia as well. So, and also selling tournament experiences. So we've got the Open coming up in July, selling the Masters. So we're going from strength to strength. And what we found is that unless golfers are told that they can't go on a golf break because of COVID or something that physically stops them from going, then they don't tend to sacrifice their golf breaks, which is great. And we've seen it go from strength to strength. The bounce back has been phenomenal, and after such a terrible year. So it's great to see us go from strength to strength.
Amazing. Fantastic. Lovely. Well, like I say, B, really appreciate it. I hope everyone has found this episode insightful. I certainly have. It's been an
I
absolute learning
hope so.
experience for me.
And if anyone has any questions,
No,
reach out to me. I could talk about it all
yeah,
day.
absolutely.
I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to sprints, which I never thought I'd
Yeah.
say.
Wow.
But
Hey, when something helps you so much, which it clearly has, how can you not be a geek, as you say about it? But look, I'll leave all your details in the show notes. And yeah, feel free to reach out. So, look, thank you all for listening, and we will see